right. Well, today we're starting a brand new series called A Better Way to Pray. A Better Way to Pray. And maybe you're excited about that. Maybe you're not so excited about that. But we'll get to that in just a minute. All right, so first, real important question here, okay? Is there anyone who remembers what life was like before caller ID? Anybody? Yeah, remember that? Like when the phone rang and you didn't know who it was. If you don't know what I'm talking about, if you never experienced it, let me just explain it to you. Anytime the phone rang, first of all, you were home because there were no such thing as cell phones at the time. The phone would ring, and at least in my house, it was immediate stress, especially if it got past the second ring. It'd be like, who's gonna get the phone? Someone get the phone. You know, someone's in the shower, someone's in the garage, and there's this mad scramble. And then you run to the phone, which is tied to the wall, right? And you pick it up, and in doing that, you are just venturing into this world of mystery and uncertainty. You don't know who's on the other end. Could be your best friend, could be your worst enemy. You don't know. So you just pick up the phone. It's crazy. I was trying to explain this to my kids. Actually, just yesterday, we were in the car. I took out my phone and I showed my daughter the little icon, the phone button on your phone, the green thing with the shape of the phone in there. I was like, hey, you see that shape inside that box? I was like, do you know what that is? She was like, it's a phone. I was like, have you ever used a phone that shape? She was like, nope. And all of a sudden, there was this disconnect. My wife was sitting next to me. She was like, yeah, when we used to use the phone when we were younger, you'd have to remember somebody's phone number. You had to memorize their phone number. And my daughter was like, what? And she goes, did you have to memorize their voices? We're like, I don't know. I guess I never really thought about that. It was crazy, right? And then eventually caller ID came out, and all of a sudden, the first people that had caller ID had to tell the world, you'd call their house, you'd be like, hey, it's Lou. And they'd be like, I know. Okay, great. So now, most of us live in the world of caller ID. Cell phones, right? You take out your phone, boom, you know who's calling. For the most part, unless it's scam likely or, a robo call. But for the most part, you know who it is. So here's the question. Have you noticed, right on cue, have you noticed that you feel different ways when different people call? Your friend calls. I've got a friend, he lives in New Hampshire. When he calls me, I'm just at ease. His name's Tori. I pick up the phone, hey. You don't have to try. It's just him, Or maybe your kids call you if you got kids and you're excited, even though you're probably gonna end up losing money by the end of the phone call, right? Or maybe you have a boss, and when he or she calls, it's a little stressful. They're gonna ask me to do something. Did I not do something? Depending on what that relationship looks like. Maybe you have a friend that you owe something to. Maybe you've had your neighbor's lawnmower for the last 3 weeks. Or you owe someone money, and you feel, okay, and you gotta decide, I'm gonna pick up this phone call, right? Well, okay, so you get the point, right? We feel different ways when different people call. Here's the question. When you think about praying, if we're talking about it, for the sake of the metaphor, as God on the other line, honestly, for real, what kind of feelings rise to the surface? Everyone has them. When we say prayer, everyone feels a certain way about it. What kind of feelings, honestly, rise to the surface? Maybe you're here today and, you're not especially thrilled to be here. You're doing someone a favor and you're not thrilled that we're talking about prayer, and you're kind of resistant. No, prayer, I'm not a person that prays, not for me. No. Okay, there's a feeling of resistance. It's not my thing. And I get that. Or maybe you did at one point pray, but it's kind of a sore subject. Maybe it's a feeling of frustration. I tried that, someone recommended that to me once. I tried to stick with it, but it didn't really do much for me. So there's a little frustration. Maybe there's a feeling of guilt or obligation when you hear prayer. I know it's a good thing, but I really don't do it as much as I should. or would like to, or feel like I'm supposed to, you know? Feelings of disappointment, maybe it's feelings of boredom, feelings of routine, like, okay, I try to do it on a regular basis, and it's just like, check the box, did my prayer, right? For all of us, and sometimes we don't take the time to like think about it and put it into words, but all of us have some kind of feeling about prayer. And what's really interesting right now, especially right now in the world, because just things are, have been crazy for a couple years now, there's like a widespread desire for a better way to pray. There's this widespread like hunger to, like, there's this hope that like there's someone out there who actually cares that I could talk to and maybe could do something about my situation. But at the same time, there's a feeling of dissatisfaction. Like whatever my experience has been, I feel like there's gotta be something more to it. There's a desire like with this sense of dissatisfaction. So what we're really talking about over the next couple weeks, no matter where you are in your faith or how you feel about prayer, what if you took your concept of prayer, and even for just the sake of the time that we have together, what if you just set it aside and tried to like build it from the ground up? Take your experience, what you have, especially if it's negative experience, just say, okay, what if I started thinking about prayers if I would have never been introduced to it before and tried to understand it from the start? What if really there was a better way to pray? What's really interesting about prayer is that, like I said, we all have different feelings about it, but I'm willing to bet that whatever feelings you have about praying, they're not new. Like you're probably, and I can't speak for you, but you're probably not the first person to feel the way that you feel about praying. In fact, when Jesus was around, like his closest followers, his earliest followers had all these feelings about praying. And there was even this desire within them to find something that was better. There's this one time where Jesus was praying. In fact, Luke records this for us. I'll read it to you. It says this. It says, one day, Jesus was praying in a certain place. I don't know what place, but apparently it was a certain place. And after he was finished, one of his disciples said to him, one of his followers, one of his closest friends, sees him praying, and he says to him, Lord, teach us to pray. Now, what's interesting about that is that these guys knew how to pray. They would have grown up in their homes praying all the time with their families in religious settings. This was something that wasn't foreign to them. But there was something about the way that Jesus prayed that was so different, and they wanted in. They wanted to be part, they wanted to know how to do it like that. The other thing that's kind of interesting is that they also weren't new to Jesus when this question was asked. They had been with him for a long time. They had already seen him do some pretty amazing things, and they had even done some pretty amazing things. And so for them to ask Jesus to pray was kind of like humbling, was kind of like, okay, we gotta know. You think they would cover praying in like Jesus 101, but later, like this is later on that they're saying, we wanna be able to do it like you. We want a better way to pray. In a culture where like the religious teachers, the most religious people prayed in really like fancy, formal ways, Jesus prayed in really clear and simple terms. In a culture where people felt like they needed to like repeat themselves when they were praying and approach God from like a distance, Jesus prayed in a way that was natural and intimate. In a culture where people felt like they had to check their prayer box to do their like good religious duty, it seemed like Jesus prayed because he wanted to. And so they're watching and they're like, there's something he's doing, something he gets that's just so different from everything that we've seen. We want in, like we want to be part of that. And so thankfully, Jesus gives, like he tells them, all right, fine. And this was unprovoked. This is not him saying, okay, let me teach you how to pray. This is them saying, like, show us how to pray. And he gives us this model prayer, which is pretty famous. You've probably heard of it. He says, this is how you should pray. It's called the Our Father or the Lord's Prayer. A lot of people have heard of that, right? Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, right? Maybe you've heard of that. This is the model for them. He says, okay, this is the radical, groundbreaking, different way to pray that you've been longing for. It's so different than everybody else. Now, if you're like me, growing up, the Our Father, it was like stored in my small little mind right next to the Pledge of Allegiance, It was like, I don't really know what I'm saying, but I know at certain points I gotta stand up, I gotta put my hand on my heart, and I gotta say, I don't know what a pledge is, I don't know what allegiance is, I don't know who Richard Stans is, and I don't know it, indivisible, and we just did it. And it was the same way with the Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. I just knew sometimes we stand up and we say it, and that was the right thing, but it meant nothing to me. What might be like old news to you and to me was radically different. But we have to understand like what was going on in that context. And so if we're going to like build or even be open to building a new approach to praying, we have to start here, like with the beginning of this prayer. So Jesus says, this is how you should pray. You ready? He says, Our Father. You probably knew that part was coming. Our Father. But even there, stop. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of different names and pictures, images for God, all throughout the ancient scriptures. But Jesus almost exclusively refers to God as his Father. It's as if he's saying, this is who's on the other line, right? This is how I want you to picture who's receiving the prayers that you're sending up. He could have said the Lord Almighty, he could have said Yahweh, Jehovah Jireh, Adam, like there's all these words he could have used. But what he's saying is, I want you to picture God as a father and to take the posture really of a child. Now, I have kids, I have two little kids, they're 6 and 8. And having kids for me really helped me to understand God as a father and also like not just in how God feels about me, but in how I can approach God. Like my kids, they just don't ever hesitate to grab me or ask me for things or snacks. It's like totally unpolished, nonstop, dad, like constant, they'll be, sometimes it's an urgent thing, and they're hanging from the monkey bars, they won't realize how high they are, and they're screaming for help, dad, other times they want a snack, other times, my son, Logan, realized Pikachu evolves into Mega Charizard, and it's like, dad, I just gotta tell you, and it's like important, and I'm like, okay, but I'm excited to hear from him. A few years ago, thankfully we're past this, but there was the famous like, dad, I'm done, coming from the bathroom, just totally unpolished, calling out to their dad or to their mom. Like a child who needs something. They're not worried about how everything's coming out. They're just going to someone they know is going to embrace them. And so like really the question, all right, when we're talking about prayer, and we've got to be honest with ourselves here. If we talk about prayer, the real question that you and I have to answer is, who are you praying to? Are you praying to a father who loves you, who is in your corner, who wants the world from you, even though you may not be getting it right, even though you don't know all the answers, even though you've got issues, doubts, unbelief, are you praying to a father who loves you? Or are you praying to an angry, cosmic killjoy, some power-hungry dictator, a judge who's never happy with you, someone who maybe is happy with the fact that you're praying right now, but really feels like you should have been praying a little bit more? Like maybe he feels like you're doing a good job, but really you should have been doing a little bit better, right? Someone who's just impossible to please, who has a totally unrealistic standard and is never really all that happy with you. Maybe he loves you because he has to and he's God, but he doesn't like you. You know, like when you picture who's hearing your prayers, what do you picture for real? And if you think about the question I asked in the beginning, when I said, how do you feel about prayer? Like prayer is just, it's talking to God. But it also reveals, when we say, how do you feel about prayer? We could say your feelings about prayer reveal your feelings about God. If you feel like, oh, I'm just not doing it enough, or I'm not doing it right, or that should show you that you feel like really deep down there's a God who doesn't feel like you're doing enough, who has a standard you're not quite meeting, who's critical of you. Jesus wants us to understand God as a father and to run to him with the freedom that you would run to a good, perfect father. We have to be real. We have to be real about who we believe is on the other ends of our prayers, because that will totally affect the way that we handle our prayers. Then there's this next part, which is just great, right? It says, our Father in heaven, here we go, hallowed be your name. Right? Now, I have a very low tolerance for spiritual phrases that I don't understand. You know, I like run into one of these and I'm like, okay, in what situation am I ever saying this phrase? You know, like if I saw it, I was like, hey, Bill, how you doing? Hallowed be your name. Like, what am I saying? You know? Or think about this. If God answered this prayer, what did he just do? What changed? From before you prayed that to now you pray, what changed? Right? But here we are, like in the beginning, this is the model prayer. It's line number 2. We've already run into a phrase that for so many of us just means like nothing. I used to think Halloween, maybe it has something to do with Halloween because that's the only time I ever saw a phrase like that. But really, this is building on the first line. So the word hallowed comes from the word meaning holy, which really means set apart or completely different. It's in a category, something that is hallowed is in a category all by itself. Like let's say I had a big jar of baseballs or a bucket of baseballs, but one of them was a little dirty. And you looked at that one that was a little dirty, right? And you're like, what's that baseball? And it's just in there with all the other baseballs. I was like, oh, that was Derek Jeter's last at bat when you'd be like, whoa, like there is something different. There is value to that. Should be in a box, a glass box. It's totally set apart, totally different. And so to say like hallowed be your name, the verbiage is weird because of the translation, but a name here is not literally the name that comes out of a mouth. It's the person, it's the identity. What Jesus is saying is like when you pray, like you pray to your Father in heaven, but then you acknowledge there is no one like you. There is no one like you. There is no one who has the patience that you do. There is no one who cares for me like you do. There is no one who sticks around the way that you do. There is no one who is as concerned about the things that I'm carrying that you are. You are totally in a separate category, all on your own. And so, yes, you're a father, but you're not just like any regular father. You are in a category all by yourself. What's interesting is that a lot of times, people tend to project our feelings about our like biological fathers or the people who raised us. We tend to project those feelings onto the way we see God. And so if your father growing up or the person in your life that was in that father role, place, if he was critical of you, you are way more likely to see God as someone who's critical. If he was never happy with you, you are way more likely to see God as someone who will never be happy with you. If you could never do enough, if you could never measure up, if you always felt like a disappointment, it's going to be natural for you to project those feelings right onto God. And so if your father or father figure was totally absent, you're way more likely to feel like God is gonna be there with you through thick and thin. So to say, our Father in heaven, there is no one like you. You're in a category all on your own. I may have brought some baggage into the way that I understand you. I might feel like you've had it up to here with me and you're done and one more, but that's baggage I'm carrying and putting onto you that's not real. You are in a category all by yourself. There is no one like you. If we're going to build a better way to pray, it has to start with a better picture of God. For so many of us, the biggest issue when it comes to faith and spirituality is what comes to our minds when we think of God. It's a picture that's totally off. A picture of someone we can never please, never happy, is just waiting to drop the hammer and punish us little people because we don't do what he says. Rather than someone who's in your corner and gave everything. And so Jesus is saying, start like that. And then after that, there's this phrase again, which is a little bit different, but it's the natural progression. He says, Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Now, we're not going to go through the whole prayer. This is the last part of the prayer we're going to look at. But this here, like, your kingdom come, your will be done, like, it sounds like something out of the Lord of the Rings, you know? Again, like, it's not terminology that we use. But what Jesus is saying is, like, when you're praying, what you're asking for, what you're hoping for, what you're articulating is that like in heaven, right, where things are the way that they're supposed to be, where God calls the shots, where there is, like, no pain, when things are right, like what it looks like there, would it look like that here? And he says, like, your will be done. The word for will is simply, it's desire. It's the word desire. He's like, would what you want to happen, would that be what happens? That's what we want here. Now think about this. It makes sense, right? It's natural. Like, if there is really a God up there who actually cares about you, who is in your corner, who gave, like, everything for you, wouldn't you want things to go his way? Right? Like, wouldn't you want him to get what he wants? Because he has proven to us in so many ways that he is in this for us. And when like, you look at it this way, like, it's clear that what Jesus is saying is when you start praying, like, to open up prayer, to lay the foundation of prayer, it's not getting control of God, right? Like a lot of times we go to God with our issues and worries. Like, I gotta get God to do this. And maybe if I say it right, maybe then, or if I get that right person to pray, I get enough people praying, maybe then I'll get what I want. Or maybe, and we've got all, like, it's just ways of trying to get control of the way things are. But if there's really a God in heaven who cares about us, and you can pray, like, your will be done. I've got desires. Like, I got a list. I got X, Y, and Z, all these things that I want. But before we go into that, I want what you want to happen. It's not getting control, it's giving control. And this is the kind of prayer that actually gives you peace. Just knowing, like, you know what? I may not get exactly what I want. Things may not go exactly how I hope they go, but I can rest knowing that there is a good person. Like, God, in all of his goodness, has not forgotten me. And so I'm just praying that he'll get what he wants. There's this scene in a movie. It's one of the best movies of all time. It's called Space Jam. All right? Yeah. If you've never seen Space Jam, this might not be the church for you. Just kidding. Okay. It's really one of those really deep and meaningful movies. It's Michael Jordan and the Looney Tunes, and they're playing against aliens, all right, in a basketball game. And so it's a brilliant idea. And it's the end of the game. There's this scene where they're in a huddle, and they need to score. And somehow Bill Murray makes his way into this movie. And he's in the huddle, and they've got just a few seconds left. They've got one play left, and Bill Murray, like, gets down. He's like, all right, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna get I don't remember what he says exactly. He's like, we gotta get the ball to the boy bunny, then to the girl bunny, then we gotta go here, then you gotta cut to the back. And all of a sudden, Michael Jordan just, like, stops him. And he's like, wait, just get me the ball, right? And like, that's the picture, for me, that's the picture of this prayer. Like sometimes if you're someone who prays, like maybe you go to God and you're like, all right, listen, here's my plan. I need you to do this, and then this, and then, and like starting to pray like this is saying like, you take the ball. You can be trusted. I want to put it in your hands. And then he like dunks from half court. It's amazing. But it's not like trying to get control from God. It's giving control to God. And those are the kinds of prayers that actually give us peace. You know, if you can't pray and say, God, I want what you want, honestly, if you can't say that, like, I get that. I'm there. Like, I'm often there. Not like way back in my past. Like, I'm Tuesday. Like, I'm there. But in that moment, like, the best thing we can do is take one step backward. With our Father in heaven, there is no one like you. You're in a category all on your own. And sometimes I need to stay there for a few minutes and really like digest that. Not just say the lines, right? But really just think about the fact that there is no one who is as deeply concerned about him, about me, as he is. And eventually, like the hope is that you get to a point where it's like, okay, well, I want what you want, knowing that you are as good as you are. Or at the very least, my like prayer changes to, I want to want what you want, but I'm not there yet. But when we can get there, that's when we find peace, real peace and perspective. And so I'm gonna ask the band to come back up here, but I wanna leave you with this picture. You know, this teaching of Jesus, it's recorded in Matthew, what we call the Gospel of Matthew, which is the story about Jesus recorded by a guy named Matthew. And then there's Luke, same thing, except it was recorded by Luke. They both record some version of this. And right after this, they both include almost an identical teaching. And it's Jesus, it's the words of Jesus, and he's trying to help people understand what God is like on the other end of your prayers. And so he like, you know, I picture him like looking out at the crowd and he says, who of you, like fathers, parents, those of you with children, or if you're not a parent, then like think of someone you care about, whose well-being you're deeply invested in. He says, who of you fathers, if your child comes to you and asks for bread, like think about the way you feel when they come to you with open hands, needing something from you. Who of you would give them a stone? Like, don't you know, deep ache you have within you for the well-being of your kids? That's how I want you to understand how God feels about you. He says, if you being evil, if you like with all your imperfections and issues and problems and agendas, if you know how to give good gifts to your kids, how much more does your Father in heaven, that there's no one like, how much more does he want to give good things to you? And so what if, all right? What if you take 2 minutes every day? This is new for you. Maybe you take like the time it takes for the water to get warm in your shower. And you just pray these two things. You ask God for a better picture of who he is and of what he wants. And maybe that's it. That's it. Those are two things. Those are two prayers I think God would love to answer in your life. And maybe you've prayed for a little while. Maybe you go on from there. Maybe you pray for 5 minutes or more than that. But if you've never done this before, if you've had like a terrible experience with prayer, if you've totally kept God at an arm's length, if you just did 2 minutes, same time, every day in the same place, and just said, I want a better picture of what you're like. and of what you want from me. I think you'll see, like, even just that small step is building the foundation of a more intimate, a real, better way to pray.